When a drunk Wall Street executive spotted a Muslim family on the crowded New York subway, he thought he could intimidate them without consequences. But when an elderly priest in simple black clothes quietly stepped forward to defend them, the businessman had no idea he was about to face the most powerful religious leader in the world. What happened next didn't just shock the entire subway car, it revealed why Pope Leo XIV is already transforming hearts across America. But before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It was 7:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning when Pope Leo XIV made a decision that would horrify his Vatican security detail. Instead of taking the official motorcade to his interfaith breakfast in Manhattan, he slipped out of his hotel wearing simple black clerical clothes and a worn baseball cap, looking like any ordinary parish priest heading to morning mass. "Your Holiness," Cardinal Martinez had protested earlier, "the subway system poses significant security risks. Protocol requires—" "Jesus rode a donkey, not a chariot," Pope Leo had replied with a gentle smile. "I think the Holy Father can manage the number 4 train." Now, standing on the platform at 59th Street, Pope Leo felt a familiar peace washing over him. This was what he'd missed most about his missionary days in Peru. Walking among the people, sharing their daily struggles, being present in their ordinary moments, rather than observing from behind bulletproof glass. The subway car was packed with the usual morning commuters, construction workers heading to job sites, nurses finishing night shifts, students with backpacks, and office workers clutching coffee cups like lifelines. Pope Leo found a seat near the back, his simple appearance drawing no attention whatsoever. 3 stops later, at 42nd Street, a family boarded that immediately caught his attention. An elderly woman in a beautiful hijab moved slowly with the help of a walking cane, followed by what appeared to be her daughter, a young mother carrying a sleeping toddler, and 2 school-aged children wearing backpacks decorated with cartoon characters. They found seats across the aisle from Pope Leo, the grandmother settling carefully into her seat while the mother helped arrange the children's backpacks. The family spoke quietly in Arabic, their voices filled with the gentle affection that transcends all languages. That's when Bradley Morrison stepped onto the train. Morrison, a 45-year-old investment banker at Goldman Sachs, wore a $3,000 suit that couldn't disguise the fact that he'd clearly been drinking since his client dinner ended at midnight. His bloodshot eyes swept the subway car with the predatory gaze of someone looking for a target to absorb his frustration. His gaze locked onto the Muslim family.
Morrison swayed slightly as the train lurched forward, then deliberately moved closer to where they sat. The grandmother noticed his approach first, her weathered hands tightening slightly on her walking cane as maternal instincts honed over 7 decades sensed approaching danger. "Excuse me," Morrison said loudly, his voice carrying the aggressive confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful men. "Do any of you speak English?" The young mother looked up, her eyes showing caution but also dignity. "Yes, sir. Is there something you need?" Morrison's smile was predatory. "Yeah, there's something I need. I need to know why you people think you can just waltz into our country and take over our neighborhoods, our schools, our jobs." The subway car went deadly quiet. Business commuters lowered their newspapers. Students removed their earbuds. Everyone could sense the toxic energy radiating from Morrison's confrontation. "Sir," the young mother said quietly, "we're American citizens. My children were born here in New York." Morrison laughed, a harsh sound that made several passengers visibly cringe. "American citizens? Give me a break. Real Americans don't dress like that." He gestured dismissively at the grandmother's hijab. "Real Americans don't speak terrorist languages." Pope Leo XIV remained motionless in his seat, but his eyes were now fixed intently on Morrison. The businessman's pain was obvious beneath his aggression. This wasn't just hatred, it was grief, transformed into rage. An elderly black woman 2 seats away shook her head in disgust. A construction worker muttered something under his breath about rich jerks. But Morrison was beyond caring about public opinion. "You want to know what I think?" Morrison continued, his voice rising as liquid courage overcame whatever social restraints remained. "I think you should go back where you came from, all of you. We've got enough problems without importing more." The young mother's 8-year-old daughter pressed closer to her side, clearly frightened by the hostile stranger looming over them. The toddler began to stir restlessly, sensing the tension. That's when Pope Leo XIV rose quietly from his seat. He moved with the unhurried grace that had characterized his entire papacy, stepping forward until he stood beside Morrison. In his simple black clothes and baseball cap, he looked like nothing more than an aging parish priest, perhaps someone's grandfather heading to morning mass. "Assalamu alaikum," Pope Leo said softly to the family, his Arabic pronunciation flawless and respectful. The grandmother's eyes widened in surprise. Wa alaikum assalam, she responded instinctively, then added in accented English, You speak Arabic, father? Na'am, Khalilun, Pope Leo replied with a humble smile. Yes, a little. I learned during my missionary work. Morrison stared at the priest, his alcohol-fogged brain struggling to process this unexpected development. Several passengers had pulled out their phones, sensing something significant was about to unfold. Letakaf, Pope Leo said gently to the young mother. Don't be afraid. Kulishai sayakun bikhair. Everything will be okay. The family's faces lit up with gratitude and surprise. Here was an American priest who had taken the time to learn their language, who spoke to them with respect and kindness. Morrison's face darkened with rage. What the hell do you think you're doing, old man? Pope Leo turned to face Morrison with the same patient expression he'd shown to every critic, every skeptic, every angry soul he'd encountered in his 70 years of life. I'm speaking with my neighbors. Your neighbors? Morrison's voice cracked with incredulous anger. These people aren't your neighbors, they're invaders, and you're supposed to be a man of God, not some bleeding heart liberal sympathizer. The subway car was now completely silent, except for the rhythm of wheels on tracks. Everyone understood they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. La yumkinuka famek, Pope Leo said quietly to Morrison, his Arabic perfect and precisely enunciated. You cannot understand what you refuse to see. Morrison's mouth fell open. You're speaking their language to me? In my own country? I'm speaking the language of compassion, Pope Leo replied in English, his voice carrying a strength that made Morrison take an involuntary step backward. A language that seems to have become foreign to you. Morrison's face flushed red with rage and embarrassment. Around them, passengers were now openly recording, their phones capturing every moment of this extraordinary confrontation. Listen here, you old fool, Morrison snarled, jabbing his finger toward Pope Leo's chest. I don't need lectures from some priest who probably never worked a real day in his life. I earn more in a month than you see in a year. I pay the taxes that keep this country running, while these people, he gestured violently toward the family, suck up our resources. Pope Leo remained perfectly calm. And what has all that money bought you, my son? Peace? Joy? The respect of those around you? Morrison's eyes blazed. It's bought me the right to speak my mind in my own country without being lectured by some grandfather. Grandfather! The 8-year-old girl suddenly pointed out the subway window with excitement, speaking in Arabic to the elderly woman. Unsur, al-mamna al-kabir. Look, the big building. The grandmother smiled and responded gently. Naam habibi, mahatet al-katarat an makazia. Yes, my dear. Grand Central Station. The tender exchange between grandmother and granddaughter was so pure, so innocent, that several passengers smiled despite the tension. But Morrison saw only an opportunity to escalate his attack.
See? He shouted, his voice echoing through the subway car. They don't even try to speak English. They're turning our country into some third world.
تكلم الإنجليزية أيضاً.
The little girl said suddenly in perfect English, looking directly at Morrison with the fearless honesty that only children possess.
I speak English too, mister. I go to PS 234. I'm in 3rd grade, and I got an A on my spelling test yesterday.
Morrison stared at the child, momentarily disarmed. But alcohol and rage quickly reclaimed control. Don't smartmouth me, kid, he growled. Your family doesn't belong here. That's when the toddler in his mother's arms began to cry, not from fear, but from the overstimulation of the crowded subway and his disrupted nap. The sound was purely innocent, the universal cry of a sleepy child. But Morrison snapped. Great! Now the baby's crying. This is exactly what I'm talking about. They drag their screaming kids onto public transportation, force the rest of us to deal with their... Sir, please lower your voice, the young mother said firmly, standing up while holding her crying toddler. You're scaring my children. Morrison stepped closer, his massive frame towering over the young woman. Maybe your children should be scared. Maybe they should learn that actions have consequences. Maybe... Pope Leo moved between them so smoothly that Morrison didn't realize what had happened until he found himself face to face with the quiet priest, instead of the family. That's enough, Pope Leo said, his voice carrying a new edge of authority that made Morrison blink in surprise. Get out of my way, old man, Morrison snarled. This doesn't concern you. When children are frightened and families are threatened, it concerns every person of conscience, Pope Leo replied, which apparently excludes you. Morrison's face went purple with rage. How dare you! The subway car began to slow as it approached the next station. Morrison glanced at the approaching platform, then back at the family, his alcohol-impaired mind hatching a plan. You know what? Morrison announced loudly to the entire subway car. I'm done talking. These people want to stay in America? Let them prove they belong here. He turned to the grandmother, who was watching the confrontation with frightened but dignified eyes. Hey, old lady, you understand English? The grandmother nodded slightly, her hands gripping her walking cane. Good, Morrison sneered. Then understand this. Get off at the next stop. Take your terrorist family and get off my train. Sir, Pope Leo said, stepping forward. This family has every right to— Shut up! Morrison roared, his control completely gone now. I'm talking to her, not you! The train was slowing more now, the next station clearly visible through the windows. Morrison pointed at the grandmother with a shaking finger. You heard me, lady. Get up. Gather your little terrorists and get off this train before I—
Before you what? Pope Leo asked quietly. But his voice carried such authority that Morrison actually stopped mid-sentence. Before I make them get off, Morrison said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Pope Leo stepped closer to Morrison, close enough that only the businessman could hear his next words. Man kana yurid al-harb, falyastayed laha, he said in flawless Arabic. Whoever wants war, let him prepare for it. Morrison's eyes went wide. Did you just threaten me in Arabic? Pope Leo smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I quoted Sun Tzu, in Arabic. The point being that you seem to be preparing for a war you don't understand, against people you've never tried to know. The train was almost at the station now. Morrison glanced around the subway car, seeing dozens of phones pointed at him, faces filled with disgust and disapproval. His career, his reputation, everything was being recorded and would soon be shared across social media. But instead of backing down, Morrison did what cornered bullies always do. He escalated to violence. You want to play games with me, old man? Morrison moved toward the grandmother who sat frozen in her seat. Let's see how tough you are when— He reached for the elderly woman's arm, intending to physically drag her from her seat. That's when Pope Leo XIV acted. The businessman's hand never reached the grandmother. Pope Leo caught Morrison's wrist with surprising strength, his grip like iron despite his 70 years. Do not, Pope Leo said, his voice carrying the full weight of papal authority, lay a hand on this woman. Morrison tried to pull free, but the Pope's grip was unbreakable. Let go of me, you crazy! Morrison swung his free hand at Pope Leo's face, a wild haymaker fueled by alcohol and rage. Pope Leo released Morrison's wrist and stepped aside with practiced ease, causing the businessman to stumble forward, directly toward the grandmother, who was struggling to stand up and move away from the violence. Morrison's momentum carried him into the elderly woman, who cried out in Arabic as she lost her balance, her walking cane clattering to the floor as she began to fall. Pope Leo caught her, not just steadied her, caught her completely, supporting her full weight with gentle strength as he helped her regain her footing. His movements were so graceful, so protective, that several passengers gasped in admiration. Shukran, shukran jazilan, the grandmother whispered, tears in her eyes as Pope Leo carefully helped her back to her seat and retrieved her walking cane. Morrison stood swaying in the aisle, his suit disheveled, his face flushed with alcohol and embarrassment as he realized what had just happened. He had attempted to assault an elderly woman and instead had been effortlessly outmaneuvered by a 70-year-old priest. The subway car was completely silent, except for the gentle murmur of Pope Leo speaking Arabic to the grandmother, asking if she was hurt, telling her she was safe. When Pope Leo finally turned back to Morrison, his eyes held something the businessman had never seen before. Not anger, not hatred, but profound sadness. Look at yourself, Pope Leo said quietly. Look at what you've become. Morrison's bravado cracked. They don't belong, neither do you, Pope Leo said with devastating gentleness. Not like this. Not filled with hatred for people you've never taken the time to understand. The train had stopped at the station now, doors open, but no one moved. Everyone in the car understood they were witnessing something historic. Pope Leo turned to address the entire subway car, his voice carrying clearly to every passenger. This woman, he said, gesturing to the grandmother, survived the Lebanese Civil War. She came to America 40 years ago with nothing but her children and her faith. She worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, washing dishes during lunch, watching neighbors' children in the afternoon, to put her daughter through nursing school. Morrison stared as Pope Leo continued, having learned the woman's story during their brief Arabic conversation. Her granddaughter, the little girl you just terrorized, wants to be a doctor when she grows up. Not because she wants money or prestige, but because she wants to help people who are sick. That's what she told her grandmother this morning. Several passengers were now openly weeping. The construction worker who had muttered earlier now removed his hard hat, holding it respectfully. Her grandson, Pope Leo gestured to the young boy, is in the gifted program at his school. He's learning calculus at age 10. He wants to be an engineer and build bridges, literally and figuratively. Morrison's hands were shaking now, his anger transforming into something else entirely. And this young mother, Pope Leo placed a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder, works as a nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital. She's been treating COVID patients for 2 years,
risking her own life to save others. Americans. People who look like you, Mr. Morrison. Morrison's face crumpled. How do you know my name? Pope Leo studied Morrison's face with the compassion of someone who had spent decades ministering to broken souls. I don't know your name, but I know your pain. The subway doors began their warning beep, preparing to close. Tell me, Pope Leo said gently, what happened to you? What turned your heart to stone? Morrison's mouth opened and closed silently. Around them, passengers waited with held breath. My son, Morrison finally whispered, his voice cracking. My son Danny was a Marine, second tour in Afghanistan. Pope Leo stepped closer, his eyes filled with understanding. Tell me about Danny.
Morrison's carefully constructed walls began to crumble.
He was supposed to come home last Christmas. We had plans. I was going to take him to see the Yankees, just like when he was a kid.
Tears were streaming down Morrison's face now, 2 years of suppressed grief pouring out in the middle of a New York subway car.
What happened to Danny?
Pope Leo asked softly.
IED.
Morrison choked out.
He was escorting a convoy to deliver medical supplies to a village outside Kabul. The village elders had requested help. They were Muslim families, just like...
Morrison's eyes fell on the family he had been terrorizing, and his face contorted with anguish.
Danny died protecting them.
Morrison sobbed.
My son died saving Muslim children, and I blamed them all, every single one of them. For 2 years, I've been so angry.
Pope Leo placed both hands on Morrison's shoulders.
Danny sounds like a hero.
He was.
Morrison whispered.
He used to send me pictures. Kids in the village school, families getting clean water, grandmothers teaching kids to read. He said they reminded him of stories I used to tell him about his own great-grandmother coming from Ireland.
The subway doors closed, but the conductor seemed to sense something important was happening. The train remained at the station.
Danny wrote me a letter.
Morrison continued, his voice barely audible.
His last letter. He said the village grandmother, this old Muslim woman, reminded him of Grandma Morrison. Said she made the same face when she was worried about her grandkids. Asked about his family the same way.
Pope Leo looked at the grandmother sitting across the aisle, then back at Morrison.
What would Danny think about what just happened here?
Morrison collapsed onto a nearby seat, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face in his hands.
He'd be ashamed of me. He'd be so ashamed.
The elderly Muslim grandmother, who had been listening to the entire exchange with growing understanding, slowly stood up despite her frail condition. Using her walking cane for support, she made her way across the aisle to where Morrison sat weeping.
Ya Ibn,
She said gently, placing a weathered hand on Morrison's shoulder.
my son.
Morrison looked up at her through his tears, and she continued in careful English.
You're Danny. He sound like good boy, like my grandson Ahmed, who want to be engineer, build bridges.
Morrison stared at her, seeing not a threat or an invader, but a grandmother whose love for her family was identical to his own mother's love, to his own love for Danny.
Ahmed,
She continued.
he want to join army when he 18, like Danny. He say he want to protect America, protect families.
Morrison's sobs intensified.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. You must think I'm a monster.
The grandmother's weathered hand remained on his shoulder.
No monster, just Hazen. Sad father. I understand. I lose my husband in war. Anger is, how you say, a shawl, then sadness. Pope Leo watched this extraordinary moment unfold, his own eyes moist with tears. Around them, the entire subway car was witnessing something beautiful. Walls built by grief and fear being demolished by simple human compassion. Your Danny, the grandmother continued. He protect my people. Now I pray for Danny. I pray for you too. Morrison looked up at her. This woman he had terrorized and tried to assault, who was now offering to pray for his son and for him. You would do that? After what I just... Naam, she nodded. Yes, Danny is with Allah now, with God. He see us here. He happy we talk, not fight. The young mother stood up, still holding her toddler, and approached Morrison. Sir, would you like to see something? Morrison nodded, unable to speak. She pulled out her phone and showed him a photo. Her at Mount Sinai Hospital in her nurse's scrubs, standing beside a hospital bed with an American flag and Marine emblems visible on the nightstand. I treated Marines at the hospital, she said quietly. Danny's unit. Some came back injured. I took care of them because they took care of people like my family. Morrison stared at the photo, then at this young woman who had possibly cared for his son's fellow Marines. You helped our soldiers? Of course, she said simply. They're our soldiers too. This is our country too. Pope Leo stepped forward, sensing the moment was complete. Mr. Morrison,
You ask what I do. I'm not just any priest. I'm Pope Leo XIV. Morrison's eyes widened in shock, but Pope Leo continued. And these beautiful people you were terrorizing? They're exactly the kind of Americans Danny died protecting. They're exactly the kind of Americans who make this country great. Morrison stood up slowly, looking around the subway car at the faces watching him, no longer with anger or disgust, but with something approaching hope. I don't know how to make this right, Morrison whispered. The grandmother smiled. You start here. You start now. You remember Danny proud of America because America welcome everyone who love America. Pope Leo placed a hand on Morrison's shoulder. Danny's watching, and he's proud that you found your way back to the man he knew you could be. Morrison turned to the family one more time. My name is Bradley Morrison, and I am so deeply sorry for everything I said and did. You don't owe me forgiveness, but Danny would want me to say it anyway.
The little girl who had been so frightened earlier stepped forward and tugged on Morrison's expensive suit jacket. When he knelt down to her level, she said solemnly, "Mister, my grandma says people who say sorry and mean it are good people. Do you mean it?" Morrison's voice broke. "Yes, sweetheart. I mean it more than I've ever meant anything." She nodded seriously, then surprised everyone by giving him a small hug.
Then Danny probably forgives you too.
As the train finally began moving again, Morrison remained standing, looking around at his fellow passengers. Construction workers, nurses, students, retirees, all of them Americans, all of them sharing this moment of grace. "Thank you," he said to the Muslim family. "Thank you for showing me what Danny saw, what America really is."
The grandmother nodded. We pray for you, Bradley Morrison. We pray you find peace.
As Pope Leo returned to his seat, preparing to exit at the next station, he reflected on what had just occurred. In 20 minutes, on a New York subway, hatred had been transformed into understanding. Grief had been healed by compassion, and strangers had become family. Morrison spent the rest of the ride talking quietly with the family, learning their names, their stories, their dreams. When they reached their stop, he helped the grandmother down to the platform and exchanged phone numbers with the family.
I want to visit Danny's grave,
He told them before they parted.
Would you come with me? I think he'd like to meet you.
The grandmother smiled through her tears.
We would be honored.
As Pope Leo exited at Grand Central, a young man with a camera phone approached him.
Father, that was incredible. The whole thing's already going viral. People are calling it the subway miracle. Do you have any comment?
Pope Leo smiled.
Just this. Danny Morrison died for an America where all families can ride the subway, and today, his father remembered that. Sometimes, that's all the miracle we need.
The video of Bradley Morrison's transformation spread across social media within hours. Hashtag Subway Miracle and hashtag Danny Would Be Proud became trending hashtags worldwide. But more importantly, people began sharing their own stories of finding common ground across religious and cultural differences. Morrison returned to work the next day and quietly began mentoring young Muslim professionals in his company. The grandmother started volunteering at a veteran support group, sharing her story and helping other families process grief and loss. And Pope Leo XIV continued riding public transportation whenever possible, because sometimes the most important papal duties happen not in Vatican halls, but in the ordinary places where real people live, work, love, and sometimes find their way back to their better angels. In the end, one man's hatred had been transformed by an elderly woman's grace, a young mother's compassion, a child's innocence, and a pope's willingness to see the human heart beneath even the ugliest anger. Sometimes the greatest miracles happen not in churches or cathedrals, but on the number 4 train, when strangers choose love over fear and remember that we're all just trying to find our way home. And if you enjoyed this story, please share your thoughts in the comments below.